Hi everyone. Welcome. See people still logging in, but yeah, tonight's webinar, navigating the festive season when you're trying to conceive. I'd like to start tonight, first of all, by an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, myself and Monash IVF acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, the sea and the community. I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people attending our webinar tonight. I'm here on Boonwurrung lands. The sun is shining out the window, and I thank the Boonwurrung people for sharing this land on which I'm able to speak to you tonight. I think we've got people attending tonight from all around the country, and some people will be with Monash IVF already and others won't be. So Monash IVF Group is found all around the country. You can see all those lovely dots. And we're really passionate about helping people. We've got IVF clinics and ultrasound clinics all around Australia. I'm actually based down in Melbourne, in Richmond. So yeah, my name's Claire Boone. I'm a psychologist here at Monash IVF. And as I said, I've had almost 10 years of experience of seeing people go through the festive season when they're trying to conceive. And I guess, you know, a lot of people come into this season and they're like, why is this season so hard? Why is it so hard to come into the festive season when you're trying to conceive? And I think it's actually quite a few things at once that kind of culminate. And I think one of those is clearly the festive season this time of year has a huge focus on kids and a huge focus on family. So when you're trying to conceive, when you're trying to make your family unit and those sorts of things, I think it's a stark reminder of all of those things that you're trying to achieve and not achieving at this time, you know. What else does it do? It involves a lot of socialising. I don't know about you, but I feel like this time of year, there's so many social events and so many people wanting to catch up with you. And often they're catch-ups or social events with people that we haven't seen in a while. And I think that can be a bit awkward, particularly if you've been focusing on trying to conceive and, you know, being taken up with that during the year. It can feel a bit vulnerable to be like setting ourselves up for these social events with people that we haven't seen for a while. And we kind of know at these social events, you know, I think a lot of people have experienced that we go to these things and we find out news and we find out someone's pregnant in those moments, and we have to react and there's people there. And so I think that can be kind of really anxiety provoking. Understandably for a lot of people. And of course, you know, we're catching up with people we haven't seen in a while. What are the topics of conversation people want to talk about? Yeah, we get all these intrusive questions that we're not ready or not prepared to answer, or it's really going to pick at our armour that we've set up to get there that day. Yeah, so I think this tension that we have at this time of year, you know, is really normal and understandable. What else is this time of year? It marks the passage of time, you know. I think, you know, it's the end of another year. It's the start of another year. And I think even if we don't place a lot of value on those things, I think a lot of us still do feel a sense of, you know, this year is ending and I haven't got that baby that I've been trying for. You know, I really thought it would be this year. I don't want to go into another year, you know. So it marks the passage of time. And even if, as I said, even if we're not focused on those things or don't think we've been focusing on those things, I think a lot of people still talk to me about the surprise when they get to the end of the year and they're feeling, you know, really anxious about the end of the year approaching. I think the other thing about this time of year is there significant events often in our lives. And so it can mark for a lot of people what, might have been or should have been their baby's first Christmas, a baby that they've lost along the way in this journey of trying as well. And that can be really another hard milestone to be passing, and combine that with other people around you having first Christmases with babies and those sorts of things. It's a really difficult time for a lot of people. And I guess, tonight I want you to hear that really strongly, that this is, we had, such a big response to this webinar. And I think that's just a testament for how difficult this time of year is for a lot of people when they're trying to conceive. And when I talk to people, they will tell me, so-and-so's pregnant, my sister's pregnant, my sister-in-law's pregnant, those sorts of things. And I'm finding it so hard to be happy. Some people might be angry, pissed off. They don't want to hear that someone's fallen pregnant really easily and those sorts of things, So it's really common and normal to have these strong reactions to pregnancy news, and around this time of year makes it even harder, I think, for all those reasons that I just outlined. Of course, maybe you've never liked this time of year. I think a lot of people find the festive season hard for a lot of reasons. It doesn't have to be because they've been trying to conceive. So maybe you've never liked this time of year, and now this whole situation is another reason to dislike it even more. Or maybe you used to love the festive season. Maybe it was one of your favourite time of year. And so now you've got this double whammy. You've got, not only feeling those feelings I was talking about the end of year approaching and not having that baby, not being pregnant for Christmas as you might have hoped, and all of those things. Not only feeling terrible about that, but also feeling like you've kind of lost this time of year that was, say, magical or lovely for you. So really tough. And, if we think about a lot of those feelings that I'm talking about, what does it come down to? And it comes down to grief and loss. We don't often call it those things, but grief and loss is what it is. And if we name it that, then some of the other parts of what goes on for a lot of people, I think, become normalized as well. So it's normal. It's normal when you're grieving and you're feeling loss that you've had during the year. You're feeling this loss around the festive season and the new year starting soon and all of those sorts of things. It's normal to be emotional, to cry, to find yourself sobbing, to be triggered by things, to be triggered, by those social events and all of this focus on children and family and everything. So it makes total sense. So if you're coming here tonight and you have been feeling very emotional about this, more so than other times of the year and things like that, I'm here to tell you that's absolutely common, normal, total understandable reaction at this time of year. Yeah. So I guess, I think a lot of people maybe have come here tonight to get some ideas. They know. I'm not telling you anything there that you didn't already know. This time of year is tough. So what can we do about that? Yeah. And I think, I guess my first thing is let's get proactive. Let's make a plan. And the first part of that plan, I think, is to be selective about people and about events. Yeah. A colleague of mine was talking about healthy avoidance. So there is healthy avoidance. You do not have to go to every single social event on this festive season calendar. You can stay away from some of those events and some of those people that feel particularly triggering for you. Yeah. Avoiding everything, probably not so healthy. Yeah. Cutting off all our contact with all our connections and social supports, probably not that healthy. But a healthy level of avoidance, being selective, being picky. Who are the people that when I see, I feel good? Who are the people that drain me of all of my life? Let's be picky about that. Let's be selective. Let's take this year, this festive season, and prioritize yourself in that. Yeah. And how do you do that in the festive season? It's really difficult. I don't get it right either. You're booking stuff in for yourself and people wanting to catch up. I mean, that's part of what we were talking about before, this pressure, I guess, social pressure, But how do we do that? How do we start to try and put some boundaries in and have this selective choices of where we're going to go and who we're going to see and all of those sorts of things? So the first thing I would say about that is that in this context, white lies are okay. If you need to tell a white lie about why you can't go to something, why you'll be staying home that night or that day or whatever it is, you go ahead and do that. Yeah. If that's the way to make it easier for you, remember this is about you and about prioritizing you and your well-being in this festive season. We've just had a worldwide pandemic. It is still going. Yeah. So, I say use some of those things, use some of that, we've got a society now that's much more accepting of people saying, sorry, I'm not well, I'm not going to come. And you can do that last minute, so it's okay to say, yes, I'm coming to that event, but in your mind, no, I'm not going to that event. And I'm going to pull the pin at the last minute with my excuse. Yeah. So you have your plan and you be selective about where and who you're going to be for this festive season. But of course, like I said, you can't avoid everything. It's probably not healthy. So we're talking about a healthy level of avoidance. Sometimes you do need to, okay, so I have picked an event. I am going to certain things, how do I get through that event? And I'd say the first one is make sure you've got a buddy at all social events, if you can. So if there's going to be somebody there that knows what you're going through, so some of you, it might be your partner going through this. For some of you, it might be a support person, a friend or a close family member, something like that. Yeah, so somebody that knows what you're going through, or consider some level of openness about what you've been going through. That can be really helpful. And with your buddy, with your support person, make a plan for that event. Have a signal for each other, a little secret signal, because nobody wants to be stuck with great Aunt Betty whose nosy questions keep going about, when you're having a family and having kids and all of those sorts of things. Nobody wants to be stuck with that. So let's have a signal for our partner, our buddy, who can come and extract us from that situation as well. Have an agreed get out plan, with your buddy, and if you feel like you don't want to be the one always, doing we have to leave and all that sort of thing, maybe organise that with your partner or your support person for them to be the one that says, hey, I'm sorry, we have to leave now, and calling you away, those sorts of things. So trying to come up with a game plan, I guess, for these events. For some people, these events mean that you're going to be going away from your home to go to these events. So, try and give yourself some space in that as well. You can have separate accommodation, that type of thing can be really helpful. What else can you do in those social events? I think is limit your time. Limit your time there. Yes, we're going to be coming to the lunch, but we've actually got another function to go to. So we'll be heading off at such and such time. So you're setting a time limit for yourselves on how long you're going to stay at these events. And having an excuse or a plan ready so that you can leave. the other thing is, we know at these events that you're going to get nosy questions, intrusive questions. And when people tell me the sorts of things they've been asked at these types of events, and I just I can't believe it. You know, when I think about those people who are asking those questions, you know, they aren't, of course, doing it to be nasty and horrible and poke at your wounds. They're doing it because they don't have anything else to ask. They're doing it because it's just socially, you know, apparently okay to ask these things. But I think a really good way is to practice answers to intrusive questions, like, when are you going to have a baby, and all of those sorts of questions. I think you all probably know the questions that I'm talking about, and I'm sure you've had them. And I think I think the thing that seems to work is having a practice, like a canned response to that, so that you just press play on that response. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to react. Just play. There's my response to that question. You can Google responses to those questions if you want some ideas. There's some cracking good ones if you want to have a good laugh and imagine yourself saying some really humorous responses to people. I guess for a lot of people I talk to, though, those kind of very snappy responses or humorous responses, sarcastic responses, some of those feel too much at this time of year, especially if you're dealing with family situations and social environment. You don't want to, you know, a lot of people don't want to come off feeling rude and all of these things, even though the person asking the question is asking a rude question as well. You know, so the sorts of responses that a lot of people find a bit more easy to come at, or a little bit comfortable. So if you get a question like, you know, when are you going to have a baby? What's happening on the baby front? And all of those sorts of things. Simply having a very short answer and then deflecting to another question for them. So, not sure. Hey, how's your job? Or, you know, if you want to give a bit of a sense of what's going on without going into it too much, it might be, that's a complicated question you just asked. I'm not here for complicated today. I'm here for a bit of fun. Let's talk about something else. Yeah. So a bit of deflection, but you're also giving a little bit of insight to them. You could go with just literally not answering, just smile and switch the topic. So having a whole lot of practiced answers, and having a whole lot of prepared topic switching things. So how's your job? What movies have you seen lately? Have you gone to any shows? You know, simple topic switching stuff that you can roll off the tongue and have it ready for, you know, and I think that can help a lot in those situations. And the same goes with, I think, for practicing responses that you want to make to announcements that might come at these things, pregnancy announcements or anything like that. You know, I think, you know, we can possibly expect that when we haven't seen people for a while. Oh, well, we've got news and those sorts of things. And I think they're really hard times for a lot of people, because we get stopped and stunned, and we don't know, you know, we almost can't react. And then, you know, a lot of people talk to me about, oh, I feel like everybody expected me to be excited and I wasn't excited, and all of those sorts of things. And so again, maybe having a practiced canned response to things like that, so that you can, you know, respond and then move yourself away. So, oh, wow, that's great. I've just got to pop off here and move off to the loo or wherever it is, you know, or have your signal ready, like I said, with your buddy. So having a bunch of planned or really well-rehearsed answers to those sorts of things and responses and topic changes, have them all in there. You can make a game of it if you wanted to. How many people, who's going to ask? Who's going to be the first person to ask? How many times am I going to be asked? Yeah. and what's your reward? And so kind of making a bit of a game of it with your buddy. You might not be up for that, but for some people that helps to just lighten it and look for it and be ready for it. What was I going to say? And I think, so we've talked about this idea of being selective, and those sorts of things. Some people have really found it helpful in those social events that they do go to give themselves a role in that. Maybe they're making a special dessert, you're in the kitchen and those sorts of things. You're kind of busy, you've got something to focus on and do, and those sorts of things. So some people have found that really helpful at those events as well. I think, when you are picking and choosing, sometimes those big events can be really challenging with lots of different people there and having to have lots of different conversations and those sorts of things. If you are deciding, okay, I'm not going to go to that big event, it is something to consider, to think about having or scheduling a separate event with a smaller group of people if that's possible, or just seeing certain people one-on-one and those sorts of things, because I think some people find that a lot easier. So kind of trying to think about your social calendar and schedule those things in and pick and choose who you want to see, and making sure that you are still seeing the people that mean something to you, but not putting yourself in too many situations that are difficult and triggering. But, I'm here to tell you that doing all of that is exhausting. It's draining, it takes the fun out of the festive season if you used to enjoy it and all of those sorts of things. So it's also a really good time of year and to think about how you're going to refuel, because these things will drain your fuel tank. So I think it's important to think about how you're going to refuel between those events, and making sure that events are spaced out enough that you've got enough downtime. Yeah, you've got enough time to process any of that stuff that went on at that particular event. Think about things that are indulging and a treat for you, because some of those events are going to feel like work. So let's go with work and reward. What am I going to reward myself with after this event? Yeah. So always thinking about that kind of fuel tank analogy. How am I going to refuel? Because I know I'm going to need to use a lot of fuel to get through one of those particular events. Yeah. I think the other thing about this time of year is there's a big focus on food and drinks and all of those things. And I think a lot of people who are trying to conceive are really focused on their health, those sorts of things. And this can also be a really hard time if you're trying to balance these things. I want to have a good time myself. I want to have a break and sorts of things. For some people, their clinics will have a shutdown period, so there is a sort of break from formal treatments and those types of things. So it is time, I think, to kind of work out where that balance lies for you, and again, be proactive about that and think about that, and maybe, say to yourself, okay, what's going to feel okay for me in this time in terms of maybe what I'm eating, what I'm drinking, and those sorts of things, trying to come to a moderate balance level where you feel okay. And that's my plan. And I was able to stick to that plan, and not be too restrictive on myself at the same time. I know some people had written, with their own stories and questions and those sorts of things in advance. And I think one of the things that really came through to me when I read those was the grief and loss that people have suffered throughout their fertility journey. And I think that this is a real time of year as well that you can do a few things to acknowledge that grief and loss, acknowledge those losses for yourself. We don't have a lot of rituals in our society for this, if we've we have rituals for other grief and loss, don't we? We have funerals and, memorials and things like that. But we don't have those rituals, those, sort of known societal rituals. But this may be a time of year to think about, how do I acknowledge and honour that loss? How do I do that for myself? Where's our ritual in this? For some people, that's going out and buying and getting a beautiful candle and setting it up and lighting that candle through this festive season and thinking about and acknowledging and honouring those losses. If you've had miscarriage, pregnancy loss, these things can be a really beautiful way to honour and acknowledge that. Writing a card, writing a letter, planting a special tree somewhere you can go and be, finding a special place that means something to you, somewhere you can go and be and have those moments to acknowledge that. I think they can be really healing and part of this kind of refueling and part of this acknowledging of how hard it is during this time. I was going to say, I think it's also important to think about, reaching out to people in this time, as much as it's really hard to balance this, what my colleague call it, healthy avoidance. What's the healthy level of avoidance? But reaching out to your supports, working out who you can be a little bit open with about this. For some people, this is an intensely private time, but you'll be amazed at what a little bit of openness can do. You have to be selective about with who, but also know when you need to reach out for more support. If these things are really affecting you daily, you're not able to do your sort of daily tasks and those sorts of things, your daily activities, that's really impacting you, it's time to think about reaching out for more support. And where would you go for that? Certainly, I think your GP would be a great place to go, and you can get a mental health care plan and you can go and see a psychologist with a Medicare rebate and things like that. There's lots of psychologists out there with experience in this area, so I really do think it's a worthwhile place to be able to debrief and come up with more strategies. I've I guess given you a précis of a few of them today, but it is I think far more helpful to be talking one-on-one with someone and working out the best strategies for you in this time as well. I was going to say, it's probably enough of me prattling on about this. We have, I think, a question in the Q&A. I was going to say, and this person's saying that they've started the process of IVF, and saying that right at the time of starting IVF, within that week, lost my dear mum. I was going to say, and I mean, what a time to lose your mum when you're trying to conceive and become a mum yourself. Really difficult time, and really difficult time of year. There's so much grief and loss there. So I think really important to maybe think about some of those things that I was talking about tonight in terms of that acknowledgement and honour. Try and use some of those rituals that we use when we have lost a loved one, and think about both the loss of your dear mum as well. What was I going to say? And thinking about the right timing to get started in IVF and treatment again, because that can be an emotional time itself, and certainly reaching out to the clinic that you're with, and asking for some support through the clinic as well in terms of being ready for that after the loss of your mum as well. I was going to say, some other people, I guess, touching on some of the topics that I guess I've touched on a little bit tonight, but how to navigate, when you're drinking, in terms of what you're drinking and eating throughout the festive season. And lots of people talk to me about this as well. It's a really difficult one. And also when you're trying to conceive, if you don't want people to ask you if you're pregnant, because if you're not drinking that champagne, or you're refusing that champagne and those sorts of things, then people are like, oh, so are you pregnant? And it's one of the hardest questions to get, especially when you're trying to conceive. And it's like, well, I'm really not, but I'm trying so hard, and this is part of it. I have people who, of course, will take the champagne in their hand and stand around with it and pop it down at some point. And I think, your partner or your support person at these events comes in real handy in those situations, if you do want to try and avoid those types of things and just take the drink and put it aside with your support person. So again, another thing to kind of talk to, talk with that support person that you're going to these events with. My sister is due for her 4th baby in 2 weeks. So we'll have a newborn at Christmas. We've gone through so many treatments and hope to be pregnant together during her 3rd and 4th pregnancy. How do I process this emotion of grief and happiness and love at the same time? It's so hard, isn't it? But know that we are absolutely built to hold all these emotions at once, but it can feel like one eclipses the other very quickly. We can be so happy for our loved ones and so devastated for ourselves. And sometimes that devastation just outweighs, the happiness that we have for our loved ones. These things, some people will say to me, I feel like a terrible person because I can't feel this happiness for them, and completely normal and common responses. I think, potentially really using those strategies that we were talking about before of having some ritual for yourself, so that you can go and see your sister, but know that you spent time having that ritual for yourself, and I don't know how much, these other people in your lives know about what you've been going through, those sorts of things, but some level of openness, trying to explain. And sometimes, it's not explainable, because people who are not going through it don't truly understand. And people that have been able to fall pregnant easily and numerous times, it can be difficult, I think, for them to fully appreciate. But, having some level of openness about that. So giving yourself space to have time to process that grief as well, And sometimes when we've had time to process that grief, it gives us enough fuel and space to be able to enter into those contacts with those people and be happy for them. I was going to say, another person's written in, I had a pregnancy loss a month ago. I was expecting to be 4 months pregnant at Christmas, and now I'm not. I don't want to put up the Christmas tree at all this year. Yeah, I get that. And it's hard to know. So the question is, do you think this will make me feel worse? Not putting it up. And I think that's a really hard question to answer. I think I was mentioning that right at the start, maybe if you used to love this festive season, you've got this kind of double whammy, like, am I having to give up this festive season as well? I don't know, is there a way to, use those ideas of acknowledging and honouring with the Christmas tree? If there's something that you can do to combine those two things. Because Christmas is a time, I think a lot of people are thinking about family, thinking about the family they've been trying to make. And how do we have hold those two things together? Maybe Christmas can be a time to acknowledge the hope that pregnancy represented, and the wishes and the dreams that pregnancy was represented, and the grief that has come with that, with losing that. So I don't think I can answer that question for you about whether to put the Christmas tree up or not, but how do we honor and acknowledge those things? And will Christmas, can we somehow hold those things together at the same time? I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully hearing a few things tonight, people take bits and pieces away from it. Got another one here. How do you navigate or come to terms with accepting that this may or will be the last IVF cycle you do as we draw to the end of the year? Yeah, and I talk to a lot of people about this sense of these I want to put them sort of like deadlines that we put upon ourselves as well. Is this going to be the last one? And this year, the end of this year, and those sorts of things. And sometimes we don't know we're putting them there. They're just there. We're doing it subconsciously. So I think it's important to look at those things. Often I talk to people about the sense that you might know I'm getting near the end of what I can do in this fertility treatment journey or cycle or whatever you want to call it. I might be getting to the end of that. And I don't think you'll always know in advance that it's the last one. But I think a lot of people can feel that they're getting closer to the end. But every time you do a cycle, right, there's more information from that cycle. And so that tends to lean you one way or another in terms of deciding whether that was the last one. And so not knowing in advance, so maybe it was trying to flex it up a little bit as to being another reassessment point. Maybe that after the next cycle is another reassessment point, maybe after the new year is another reassessment point for you. And maybe that might help take a bit of pressure off, because sometimes I feel like, it can feel like such a pressure, can't it? In the lead up to that, trying to flex that up a little bit, maybe, making it a reassessment point after the next cycle or after the new year and those sorts of things. It's another one in the Q&A. Saying I'm feeling, because my pregnancy losses have all been in the first few weeks, between 7 and 10 weeks, 4 losses this year, that it doesn't count. And I'm struggling to grieve appropriately because of this. Do you have any advice around how I can change this mindset for both myself and those around me? My due date was Christmas Day. Ouch. Yeah. That's a tough one, and a lot of people feel the same way, and it's hard, isn't it? I think, we do look at other people like they're worse off than me. Mine doesn't count, and those sorts of things. There might be people here tonight who haven't got to an embryo transfer, never got to a pregnancy, and those sorts of things. And they are suffering grief and loss. These losses that you're talking about, 4 losses this year, and they are losses, So absolutely, how do we reframe and change this mindset? And I don't know, can we do that for other people? Maybe we do have to do it for ourselves first. But I think taking time to really acknowledge and really honour, thinking about those ideas of using a ritual or using something, a candle, planting a tree, writing a letter, to those pregnancies, to those hoped for babies, you know, what they represented to you, the loss that they've represented. Thinking about how you can acknowledge those, how you can honour them, coming up with your ritual. Yeah, so that, you know, that I think changes it for you. Talking to somebody who knows, talking to somebody like a fertility counsellor, I think can help, because we hear these stories all the time. So we know these are losses. These are genuine losses. And as I said before, even for those of you who are sitting here tonight who go, well, I haven't got to a pregnancy, or I haven't even got to an embryo transfer, but you've tried, and they are losses. This is grief, and we need to name it, and we need to know that that's what it is, you know, so that we can grieve, you know. So I think it would be really important to do something to acknowledge that loss, particularly that loss on Christmas Day, for that due date. Another question here, any recommendations, suggestions for handling over-the-top Christmas lovers at work when you're struggling with Christmas? Yes, it is. Is it so hard to have that shoved in your face all day, every day at work? Yeah. Absolutely. And I think it's a really difficult one if you've got a workplace that's, you know, doing all that, you know, and being really over the top about Christmas. That's a really hard one. How do I kind of that? And so just going to work is going to be draining. You know, so how do you refuel? Because sometimes you can't do much about your workplace, can you, without, you know, causing a scene and all of those sorts of things. So how do you refuel? How do you, you know, get out, you know? And it kind of makes me think about all the little things that you can do, just taking a lunch break, but taking a lunch break out, taking your breaks out, going for a walk. I've started a new routine of going for a walk, getting out, and those sorts of things. Maybe thinking about that work-life balance type of thing. Yeah. And I think probably that those strategies that we talked about before of healthy avoidance. How do I get, what's the word, like, how do I pick and choose? Now, you can't always pick to just not go to work that day. I get that. But there's probably like Christmas functions and stuff like that, you know, and those things, you know, and you might want to work out ways to not go to some of those things at work as well. If Christmas is over the top where you're working. Because it is totally understandable that those things are triggering. And so I think to acknowledge that for ourselves and decide, I'm going to protect myself and I'm going to selectively decide not to do that, and feel that that's the right decision, you know, for you. Another person here said, we've been trying for our second for 4 months now. I'm anxious that being around other couples who are expecting their second or have multiple kids will be triggering for me and make me more anxious. I feel like withdrawing and avoiding social situations is how to best deal with it. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think a lot of people that I talk to, you know, where we're talking about trying for a second baby, it's really triggering. I think the drive to become a parent in the first place is really strong, but it comes from a different place than the drive to have a second. And the drive to have a second can be just as strong too. You know, so, and it is triggering, I think, seeing people who are expecting their second or already have multiple kids and all of those things. And of course, this time of year, we're going to see more of them because we're going to all of these events. And I think, you know, you're right to an extent, withdrawing and avoiding some of those situations might be your best option, you know. But I think, yeah, it's always trying to work out where's the healthy level. You know, where's the balance? You know, because if I completely avoid all people and all situations, you know, I'm losing all of these wonderful connections. You know, so where's this healthy balance? You know, and maybe it might be about that idea of trying to pick and choose, also trying to organise maybe more one-on-one things with people that you feel comfortable with or you feel understand, and those sorts of things. So trying to maybe work out the balance there. We're not always going to get the balance right. I get that. You know, we give it a shot, and we have our backup plans. Like I said, our get out plans, our you know, and our refueling plans. Yeah, because even these social things that we think are going to be okay, they can still take some fuel, you know, from us. So making sure that we're refueling afterwards, and that we've got the space to do that. Yeah. I think almost got through all of them, I think. Yeah, I think, you know, these sorts of thoughts around this time of year of you know, our life being meaningless without kids, and our you know, this purpose and drive to have kids. I think it's a really tough one, and it gets extra triggered at this time of year when we're seeing, you know, families and this huge focus on children and families and those sorts of things. It's really triggering. And sometimes, you know, some people have told me it can be really helpful to focus on others, focus on maybe others that we feel are less fortunate than us. How do we give back, you know, and those sorts of things. So rather than, you know, focusing on ourselves, how do we look at other people and other situations as well. So, you know, and I think Christmas is a great time of year for that, for some of that sort of thing, to give us some purpose in that time. What can I do to, you know, give out some of the Christmas spirit to people around me? Are there, you know, people in your neighbourhood, elderly neighbours and things like that you could do something nice for this Christmas, you know? Yeah, sometimes, you know, people have really found those that sort of focus on others helpful in that time to combat some of those emotions around them feeling this loss and grief, and, you know, where's my identity, and those sorts of things. So I think I've got through all the questions and comments tonight. I really appreciated them. It's such a hard topic, and I'm so glad we've done this tonight. I was going to say, I think take-home messages, the feelings that you've got at this time of year are normal. They are understandable. If you're finding yourself super emotional, if you're finding it really hard to engage in Christmas and all the fun that's supposed to be being had and all of those things, this is normal. Yeah. This may not be a great festive season, you know, but how do we get through it? How do we manage through that? You know, and think about some of those strategies tonight. Get proactive. Make a plan, be selective, practice answers, practice that stuff. And remember, this is exhausting and draining. So refuel. How do you indulge yourself? How do you treat yourself? How do you reward yourself after some of that work that you put out? And, you know, I think a really important one tonight that seemed to come up a lot too. How do we acknowledge and honour what we've been through and this grief and loss that you've had? How do you do that? How are you going to do that this festive season? How are you going to make that a practice? You know, make that a ritual for yourself. You think about that. How am I going to do that this festive season? And see if that helps a little through this time. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. I was going to say, and yeah, I wish you all the best through this festive season, and And yeah, think about yourself and prioritizing yourself at this time. All right. Thanks so much.